welcome you to First Friday in the Library. Tonight's program marks 2 full years of First Fridays. So let me start by thanking library staff for their hard work in making this series so successful. This is also a great time to thank you, the audience, for your enthusiastic support for this series and this library, and to remind everyone that the Mill Valley Library Foundation and the Friends make these programs possible. If you are thinking about end-of-the-year giving, we hope you will consider supporting the library. Thanks also to Jed Robertson of Small Shed Flatbreads and the Shoreline Cafe, and Steve Kubin of Heart and Home of Marin for what is a critical part of every First Friday, the wine donation. Following tonight's speakers' presentations and slideshow, we will have what promises to be a very interesting and informative Q&A. The author will be joined by Jeff Davidson, Fire Chief for the City of Mill Valley, Ron Vidal, Chair of the city's Emergency Preparedness Commission, and David Zimmerman, one of the fire monks featured in the story. Though the City of Mill Valley is considered a model in emergency preparedness, only 10 to 15% of its residents are actively involved. The rest of us hover on the sidelines, apathetic, yet smart enough to know better. Even when catastrophic events shock us briefly into action, fair weather lulls us back into complacency. Denial on this order places everyone, even that small percentage of committed citizens, at greater risk. Like any calamity, the enormous Basin Complex Fire that threatened the Tassajara Zen Monastery placed theory in direct confrontation with reality. 5 monks, possessing no formal training in fighting wildfires, defied orders to evacuate and followed some, but not all, of the standardized firefighting protocols. One of these, be alert, keep calm, think clearly, act decisively, is quintessentially Buddhist in its clarity. In fact, they were already living it. Prepared in very practical ways to face destructive fires, they understood and accepted this threat as ever present. It was a threat that had been, in a manner, incorporated into their daily practice. Colleen Morton Busch received an MFA in poetry and writes fiction and nonfiction. A Zen practitioner, she has worked as a college instructor in New Orleans and Beijing, and as a magazine editor. Her book, Fire Monks, was named one of the top 100 books of 2011 by the San Francisco Chronicle, Publishers Weekly, and Barnes & Noble, and excerpts were included in the Best Buddhist Writing of 2012. Please join me in welcoming Colleen Morton Busch.
I'm going to talk to you about a couple different kinds of fires. The fires that burn in the forest, but also the fires that burn in the hearts and minds of people. So it's interesting to me that we actually make a distinction between wildfire and some other kind of fire. Presumably a tame fire. Is the fire from a match tame? Is the fire that's coming through the power lines and lighting up this room for us tame? Fire takes many different forms. It's fuel, it's energy, it's a synthesis of conditions. Fire historian Stephen Pine says, fire is a relationship. And like most relationships, fire cannot be completely predicted or controlled. With last week's storms having pretty much drenched the Bay Area, you may be thinking more about flood than you're thinking about fire. But each year, wildfires burn bigger, hotter, longer. We've moved into fire's neighborhood, and it's clear that we're having some difficulty sorting out our relationship. But if we can relate to wildfire without separating ourselves from it, we can be prepared to face the flames of disaster, of anything that threatens our safety, security, and happiness. The fire that I wrote about in Fire Monks happened in the summer of 2008, when after 3 consecutive years of drought, the state of California was basically on fire. A lot of you probably remember the smoke. One of those fires lighted near Tassajara Zen Mountain Center, inland from Big Sur. Curiosity, how many people have been to Tassajara in this room? Okay. Another fire was already burning south of the monastery, starting earlier by an abandoned campfire. Eventually, these 2 fires burned together and became the Basin Complex Fire. So what is Tassajara? Half of you already know, but for those of you who don't, it's a place of rigorous monastic study half of the year, and half of the year it's a wonderful place to just go and unwind and unplug. To the general public, it's open. A little hard to see. This is the Han that hangs outside the meditation hall, and it says, "Listen, everyone. Birth and death is given once. This moment now is gone. Awake, each one, awake. Don't waste this life." The word now is completely worn away, because that's where the wooden mallet hits it to announce that it's time to come to meditation hall for the monks. Sunday morning, bright and early, David Zimmerman and I will be responding to that call, because we're going down to Tassajara to sit at a 7-day meditation retreat. So this is an instrument that calls the monks to the practice of waking up. And the fire, literally and figuratively, was a wake-up call as well, saying, come here now, pay attention now. 5,000 people pass through Tassajara in a typical summer guest season. They come for workshops or just to enjoy the quiet. There's no cell phone access at Tassajara. Many of the cabins are lit only by kerosene lamp. Many people come just to enjoy the mineral hot springs and the gourmet vegetarian food, including the bread that was made famous by the Tassajara bread book. Most guests come in on the stage, which used to be a horse-drawn carriage back in the day, but it's now usually a 4-wheel drive vehicle. It goes down a 14-mile, very narrow and rugged dirt road and ends at dead ends at Tassajara, basically, in the Santa Lucia Mountains of the Ventana Wilderness. So this is an aerial view of Tassajara from a peak known as Flag Rock, named for obvious reasons for the prayer flags that hang there. And you can see, basically Tassajara is sort of a reverse C shape, following the curve of the creek. It stretches about 1/3 of a mile. You can even see the 50,000 gallon swimming pool there in the lower left-hand corner of the frame. And it's very steep and rugged terrain. So work is an integral part of life at Tassajara. It's a daily part of life, in addition to meditation. So when the fire started, the residents gave up their daily practice of meditation and got to work preparing Tassajara. The guests were taken out immediately. There were about 46 of them. And most of the residents and students also left, about 70 of them. So they were down to just a crew of about 20 people who stayed behind to continue preparations. And one thing they did is built a rooftop sprinkler system from PVC pipe and sprinkler heads from a garden supply store that they called Dharma Rain. This is Dharma Rain on the bathhouse. They also opened up their fire shed and took stock of their supplies. Tassajara already has an existing infrastructure in place for in the case of fire. Usually structure fire, not so much wildfire, because in a place that burns a lot of candles and incense and kerosene, and where the structures are built of wood, and where 911 is not really an option, if you're wanting someone to come quickly, you need to take charge for responsibility for yourself. So they also cleared debris, they limbed the trees, they organized themselves into crews and did fire drills with the help of a CAL FIRE captain that came down on his vacation time because he was an old friend of Tassajara to help them prepare. So they planned, as I mentioned, always to keep a crew at Tassajara even when the fire arrived. Tassajara's had visits from wildfire before. Some of you in this room may even know. We've been there in the Marble Cone Fire. In 1977, the Marble Cone Fire. In 1999, the Preparedness Complex Fire, which actually was subdued by early winter rains before it got there. But in both instances, professional firefighters were down there on the ground with the residents, helping them. And in 2008, Basin Complex Fire, most of the firefighters who came in to pitch in and lend a hand with the preparations also felt that Tassajara was defensible. That due to the work the residents had put in and due to its location at the bottom of the valley as opposed to up on an exposed ridge, that it was a defensible place to be. Also, because of Tassajara Creek, a ready source of water, even though it was a drought, the third drought year in a row, the creek was still running and provided water. So the CAL FIRE captain at Tassajara, his name was Stuart Carlson, he supported the residents' plans to stay put. He predicted that the fire would creep in and slowly back down one of the steep ridges around the monastery. He even joked that he would be dousing the flames with a cold Coors in his hand while the residents kind of did most of the work. But the firefighters who were responsible for making decisions on the Basin Complex Fire, most of them had not actually been to Tassajara, and they wanted all the residents to leave from the beginning, and this was a story that didn't change. They couldn't put resources down there helping when the fire came through, they said over and over, because there's only one road in and out of Tassajara. Those of you who've been on it know that road. This is the valley that it goes up. If you're, this photograph is looking out from Tassajara, and it's not taken around the fire because the skies did not look like that for quite a while around the wildfires. But you can see the valley that it threads up. And it goes from about 1,500 feet at Tassajara up to about 3,500 feet at the ridge. Where those two peaks are, sort of in the center of the frame, beyond them, it flattens out onto a ridge. And it takes about 25 or so minutes to drive all the way to that point. Something just to be thinking about for later, because it's at that point where 5 people would turn around and come back into Tassajara during the final evacuation. So here is, in the dark blue in the front, is David Zimmerman, who'll be joining us later for questions. He's the director of Tassajara at the time. And behind him in the light blue is Abbot Steve Stuckey, who has come down from San Francisco to be, you know, a leader for his community in a spiritual sense, and also just to help them literally with the preparations. He's a very strong and durable guy from farm stock, so he didn't mind doing some of the work himself. And then this is Jack Froggett, who, in yellow, who was one of the firefighters that did come down and make relationships with the residents and help them with some of the preparations. And they're having what I imagine in this photograph was a conversation that's often had. As I mentioned, everything looks great. You guys have done all this great work. We still need you to leave. There's this problem. There's this road. So it was really a case of hurry up and wait. The lightning strikes happened, and it took the fire about 3 weeks to actually get to Tassajara. In that 3 weeks' time, in addition to doing all the prep work that I mentioned, they spent a lot of time, the more fit among them, running up and down these steep ridges around Tassajara, getting a look themselves at the fire. They didn't want to just take whatever the official information was that was coming from the fire information lines, or even from the firefighters that were coming down. They wanted to see with their own eyes what was happening. And so this monk is actually looking up the Tassajara Creek drainage from a peak called Hawk Mountain. And he's just looking at a lot of smoke, which is what they mostly looked at until the fire did arrive. So throughout those 3 weeks, a lot of people were watching what was going on. Anybody in this room pay attention to the blog, Sitting with Fire During the Fire? Okay, a few people. Because there's so many people that love Tassajara, really all over the world, pretty quickly somebody figured out, we better figure out a way to get information out there. So they created a blog in Jamesburg, which is the last point before the road turns to dirt, where a lot of people leave their cars and get on the stage. And so from Jamesburg, updates were being published pretty much daily to say what was going on down in Tassajara. And as the fire approached, the questions started to crop up. You know, should they stay or should they go? And there was not complete agreement, you know, within the people visiting the blog about what the right answer to that question was. Then after 3 weeks of waiting, the fire drew close in red flag conditions, amplifying this debate pretty seriously. Temperatures spiked, winds kicked up, and humidity plummeted. This was not the kind of firefighting weather that a firefighter wants to see. So all of the professional firefighters who were on the ground, including a crew that was wrapping the cabins that day that was all the way from Indiana. Resources were just coming from all over that summer to deal with all these fires. They packed up and left. The off-duty CAL FIRE captain who'd been on the ground, the one who'd been joking about having a cold Coors while they fought off the flames, he suddenly understood that indeed they were going to be alone there, and they were going to be alone there in potentially explosive conditions. So he initiated a complete evacuation of Tassajara with air tanker flights overhead to keep the road clear. So, again, not so easy to see what I want you to see, which is Mako's face in this photo. The woman in gray in the front there is the head cook at the time at Tassajara, and she is the former student fire marshal, and she's been very involved from the very beginning in all of their preparations. And her face is just completely, what am I doing? For all this time we've had this plan to stay, and here we are, we're actually leaving. How did this turn around so suddenly? Just complete sort of bafflement. She doesn't actually know that within an hour, she and 4 others, including David, who you'll meet tonight, will be right back there at Tassajara to stay for the fire. So I still get a little chill every time I think about that decision, that moment of deciding to go back to Tassajara. Because what ended up happening is they all caravanned about 6 cars up that road, up that valley I showed you. And they got to a point up on that road where they realized that if they went beyond it, they would not be allowed to come back into Tassajara. And it was at that point that 5 people said, for us, the right thing to do is we just got to go back. I've been going to Tassajara for about 10 years since I started practicing Zen in 2000. I was lucky enough last fall to get to do a 3-month practice period there, which was wonderful. It's a cherished place to me, and it's a cherished place to people all over the world. As the first Zen Buddhist monastery outside of Asia, it's a cultural and historical treasure. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, the author of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which I would venture to guess many of you may have read or at least browsed at and heard of, is one of the grandfathers of Zen, and he selected the site himself in 1966 as a place for monastic practice. So for Tassajara residents to safeguard this place and protect it was to take care of really the wellspring of American Zen. It was a personal decision and a communal decision at the same time. This decision to turn around on the road is really what hooked me into wanting to tell his story. I imagined myself in the middle of the heat and the chaos and the urgency, making the decision to turn around, knowing that I cared deeply about the outcome, but that I had absolutely no control over the outcome. I imagined doing it, on that kind of knife edge. And I wondered how the practice of sitting still and doing nothing, prepared them to act very decisively, quickly. And here was a group of Zen monks. They were not trained firefighters. They had not come to Tassajara to fight fire. They had come to sit meditation. They were committed, however, to standing their ground and meeting this fire. And I say meet because this is how they described it themselves. This is how they oriented to the wildfire, not as an enemy, but rather as an energy to be approached directly with respect and gratitude, just as you would meet anything. So this fire was called Dragon of Fire by the photographer, so take a moment to appreciate it. A photographer who was a caretaker up on the ridge in a observatory up there called the Mura Observatory took this photograph shortly after they had actually gone back into Tassajara. And shortly before, the fire would actually cross the road and close it for a couple of weeks, just as the firefighters had feared would happen. It didn't come into Tassajara proper for another almost 24 hours. About 1 p.m. the following afternoon, it comes over Flag Rock, which is, that's what in this photo, that's the peak that in the very first image was looking down into Tassajara. That's Flag Rock. And so it's coming over Flag Rock, coming down towards the Zendo here. That's the Zendo at the bottom of the frame. It's also coming over Hawk Mountain. which is the peak that the young monk was looking at the fire from, looking at the smoke from. And it's coming over the backside of Tassajara, over the Overlook Ridge, all at the same time. But these 5 people stayed composed. And they took this photograph after they'd been meeting this fire again and again and again for about 6 hours straight, with no relief and no professional help and no water drops that they could discern from air tankers or choppers. Several days later, they took this image, having a little bit of fun in their fire monk gear. Actually, they had fun before this image. David just admitted publicly at a convention that we were at a couple days ago. It was a fire congress, and David said, actually, it was kind of fun. And the room just erupted into applause. It's like all the firefighters, yeah, he knows, he gets it. This is actually kind of fun. So Tassajara was saved, and everybody was safe. I'm giving away the story, but we should still read it. The decision not to evacuate, instead to remain in place to protect Tassajara, emerged from a very particular context, influenced by topography, ecology, and history, steered by local knowledge, culture, and philosophy. A complex web of interconnected relationships between citizens and fire command, between people and the land they live on, and between individuals and their very own personal beliefs and histories. These things were all at play in the decisions that were made. So from the Zen perspective, it's important to remain open to new information and unexpected ways of seeing. In an extension of Zazen, or meditation practice, a Zen student is encouraged to question his or her own assumptions and observations, not to rest in certainty or knowledge, but to cultivate the flexible and open mind of a beginner, in which, as Suzuki Roshi famously said, there are many possibilities. There is actually always more than one road in and out. The fire at Tassajara underscored the need for community, communication, and cooperation in a dynamically interconnected world. 5 residents of Tassajara made the decisions that they needed to make, but they also respected that others made the decisions that they needed to make. The residents who chose not to stay during the fire, and the firefighters who repeatedly asked them to please leave. Zen teaches you to be your own authority, but also to walk in another's shoes. There's room for everyone's point of view, and there's ultimately no division between what's good for the fire, or the planet, or humanity. So I started Fire Monks with a question. As a Zen student, I wanted to know how practice guided the monks through this crisis. You know, for me, it was a rubber meets the road kind of story. But in asking that question, I actually feel I uncovered something that was very portable, that can be applied to any life, any situation, whether you're a Buddhist or a firefighter or a disaster preparedness person or just a regular old person trying to live a meaningful life. We can show up in the present moment and not turn away. We have that choice, always. We can honor what we know while admitting the vastness of all that we don't know. And we can accept and even embrace the wildness of our lives. The Buddha taught that the entire world is on fire. All is aflame, meaning that everything in existence is constantly changing. Fire is a potent metaphor for the mutable, fleeting nature of all being, from seasonal weather patterns to moment-to-moment human thoughts and emotions. In fact, Zen teaching stories are full of fire references. In one such story, the student is advised to practice as if your head were on fire. Suzuki Roshi told his students that they should accept this changeability and be grateful for their difficulties. If they didn't have problems, he said, what would they have to work with? It would be like a life with no fire, no transformational force, no clearing out for regeneration and renewal. Burn yourself completely, he said, like a good bonfire, leaving no trace. In a sense, he taught, there is no disaster. There is only our response to what happens moment by moment. So this is Tassajara Road, 4 days after the fire completely scoured, all the chaparral burned away, and completely exposed as the narrow ribbon of road that it is. And here it is about 9 months later, completely covered with new grasses that are coming up and smothered with wildflowers, which Tassajara was smothered with wildflowers for about 3 springs after the fire, including a lot of species that only come up after a fire. In fact, 3 weeks after the fire, this yucca bloomed next to the road. This photograph and a couple others coming after it were taken by David Zimmerman, who's also a Zen student. A beautiful book called Regarding Fire and Birth, Photography, Ecology, and Zen. So the Coulter Pines, which were down near Tassajara, adjacent to the developed part of the property, the fire swept through there, and many of those pines are gone. But again, about 9 months later, this is what's happening. They're sprouting up. And beautiful Indian paintbrush and other really colorful wildflowers coming up against the charred snags of the chaparral and the trees that were burned in the fire. So on the left is an image from 2008. It's Tassajara is an oasis of green amidst the burned mountains around it. And on the right, 2011, this is the image you saw earlier. This is the regrowth after about 3 years, everything all filled in. And side by side, these images provide a really vivid reminder of fragility and resilience. 2 characteristics that I don't think are so much opposed to each other as complementary aspects of all life. A Zen student is always bearing them both in mind. I'm not the first or the only person to see a natural affinity between Buddhist practice and disaster preparedness. In her wonderful book, A Paradise Built in Hell, local author Rebecca Solnit calls disaster, quote, a crash course in Buddhist principles of compassion for all beings, of non-attachment, of abandoning the illusion of one's sense of separateness, of being fully present, of awareness of ephemerality, and of fearlessness, or at least aplomb in the face of uncertainty. As I wrote Fire Monks, wildfire became a metaphor for adversity, a luminous evocation of disaster in all forms. If the entire world is on fire, as the Buddha taught, and everything is always changing, never solid or fixed, can we turn towards this dynamic situation and meet it like the residents did at Tassajara? Not naming it disaster, not knowing if the decision will be celebrated or mourned, not knowing what kind of fire would arrive or when. They trusted in the effort that they could make, one by one and together. That's what a fire monk does during a fire and in each moment. The fire at Tassajara inspired the monks with its beauty and ferocity. Before it arrived, it taught patience. The day it arrived, it tested their ability to keep calm and not run away with fear. After it passed, it taught gratitude, humility, and deep concern for the majesty of the natural world, for our very small human role in it, and for the future of the planet that we've changed with our outsized presence on it. So what can their example teach the rest of us? The Zen attitude toward disaster is not so much that disaster doesn't exist. It is one of the Buddha's noble truths, after all, that suffering is universal. No life escapes it. We face real emergencies and we ought to prepare for them. With the guidance of people like Fire Chief Jeff Davidson and Vidal from the Emergency Preparedness Commission here tonight. But we can't live in fear or in a state of false security. We can both make an effort and accept that we aren't in control. We can remember that what happens to us is not nearly as important as how we respond to what happens to us. The blessing of disaster is that it wakes us up. It reminds us that we're deeply connected You don't actually have to wait for disaster to know that, but often, sadly, you do wait. When the Basin Complex Fire threatened Tassajara, the monks left the meditation hall to physically prepare the monastery. It was clear to them that the proper form for meditation at that moment was to get to work, building a fire line around the grounds and setting sprinklers on the roofs. But never during this time of preparation did they stoke their fears for what might happen, or call the fire an enemy. A nuisance maybe, but not an enemy. I mean, Tassajara is utterly dependent on its guest season for supporting the activities that go on there year-round. In fact, for supporting the other centers as well, San Francisco Zen Center and Green Gulch. So it was a great hardship to have the guest season shut down, not only financially, but emotionally. Because so many people, this is an annual pilgrimage for them to come down there in the summer. The people who live there a long time, like David, they know that, and their hearts sort of ached for the people that had that interrupted. They described the fire as a friend, the summer's most demanding guest, and a fierce teacher. To meet the fire, the monks used the same tools and tactics as firefighters. They wore the same gear. But even as they took deliberate action to put out the flames, they did not feel separate from the burning. Like a fierce Zen master, the fire demanded that they wake up right this moment, because there is no other moment to be alive in. But, and here's an important distinction, I think, for us here tonight. Being present does not conflict with being prepared. Being present is being prepared. It's human nature both to dwell on the past and project into the future. Except it seems when we're contemplating our own impermanence, usually we're quite happy to not speculate in that direction in the future. Many of us living in fire and earthquake country are slow to take steps to prepare, even though we know that odds are likely that we'll see another big one soon. We're not lacking for local examples of disasters. The 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, after which the Oakland A's swept the Giants, 2 disasters in a row for some baseball fans. The 1991 Oakland Hills fire, which jumped an 8-lane freeway with the help of the wind. Clearly, preparing for a disaster is not the same as meeting one. It's the difference between talking about defensible space and feeling your eyebrows singe, between the ordinary moment and the life and death moment. But Zen doesn't really make such distinctions. In Zen, every moment is a life and death moment. Abbot Steve, who was in that photograph along with David, and is one of the abbots at San Francisco Zen Center, once said to me, "Disaster is anything that ruins our plans." Well, that happens fairly frequently, doesn't it? Probably on a daily basis, multiple times. I begin one of the chapters in Fire Monks with a quote from Leslie James, who, if you've been going to Tassajara, you may know her. She's been there, a longtime resident and teacher for many years. She said, "Human life is messy. It's out of our control. It's like we're walking around in total darkness with a little speck of light, which is called right now." Disaster preparedness may seem to run counter to admitting this kind of messiness, but I don't actually think so. Being in the moment doesn't mean you can't prepare for the future, despite its uncertainty. Preparing for the future doesn't mean you must abandon the present. These two intentions are not at odds with one another unless we put them there in our own minds, instead of befriending what is just a natural tension between them. Tassajara has a permanent resident fire crew. They train, they update their gear. Nowadays, when they build new structures, they put metal roofs on them instead of wood. And they're actually raising money for a permanent Dharma rain sprinkler system now. They even have a crew called the Ready for Anything crew, which, when I was researching this book, I just became completely fascinated with that, the Ready for Anything crew. They prepare for fire, but they don't sit at the gate with a fire hose in their hands. Disaster preparedness will not prevent disaster. It merely helps you know what to do and what to take or leave behind when disaster arrives. It helps you to see your life stripped bare in all of its true vulnerability. What cherished possessions would you take from your burning home? Where will your family meet if the earth starts shaking in the middle of a weekday afternoon? Such questions are useful, not just in a practical sense. They prompt us to remember what matters, what really matters. And when you've done this kind of taking stock, I would argue, you are actually ready for anything. Thank you.
So now I'd like to invite Jeff Davidson and Ron Vidal, Colleen and David Zimmerman to join, to come up here for a Q&A.
First of all, I want to know what month was the fire in?
What month was the fire? July of 2008.
And secondly, I'm really curious, what tactics did you use to fight the fire? What situations, concrete situations did you come up against, and how did you deal with them?
Meet during the hours of the fire? You know, we already had the hose spread out throughout Tassajara. So we had unrolled many feet of hose throughout the whole valley, had it stationed at different standpipes that we already had prepared. We had 3 different pumps ready to go. We had a portable pump, 2 portable pumps actually, at the same time. So we had all the connections that we needed to have in order to be able to just run around wherever we needed to be, pick up the hose wherever we actually saw the fire, and started putting water on it as best we could. You know, and the reason we actually turned around, the main thought we had when we turned around was to keep the pumps going that ran during the rain. We only had 3 hours of gasoline for each pump. So the thought was, let's just fill the tanks as much as we can, and we'll take shelter until, you know, the worst passes, and then we'll go from there.
So the flames actually did sweep through the complex?
It came right up, yeah. It came. We lost several buildings, several outlying buildings. It came up right to the main path of Tassajara, if you will, and yeah. Unfortunately, basically everything between the road and the creek was okay, but there were a few other places that weren't so okay. So basically 6.5 hours of running around with a hose and a shovel, and just wherever something started to burn, we just kind of did our best to dissuade it from burning.
I forgot to introduce them. So David Zimmerman, who you saw in Colleen's presentation, currently lives at the San Francisco Zen Center. He's an ordained priest, and he's been practicing Zen for 20 years. Ron Vidal is the chair of the City of Mill Valley's Emergency Preparedness Commission. He's a volunteer firefighter for Mill Valley. He spent 7 weeks at Ground Zero restoring fiber optics communication networks. And then we have Jeff Davidson. He's been with the Mill Valley Fire Department for 33 years, a firefighter for 35 years. He's the fire chief for Mill Valley. He's a 5th generation Maronite and a 3rd generation firefighter. Thank you.
I think they're coming around with the mic.
You should choose who you want. And then
Oh, we have to pick and choose. Zen students don't pick and choose. Firefighters pick.
Question for David, maybe segueing to Jeff. How important was the fire break? Would you, in hindsight, have done anything different in respect of the fire break? And then maybe Jeff could jump in and talk about our fire break, which is along Panoramic Highway.
We had a number of fire breaks that we were fortunate to have two actually fire crews come in and help us with. One was an inmate crew that came and prepared, and then the immediate fire crew also helped to support it. So we also had a natural fire break, which was the creek. So they were of varying importance. The fire breaks that were the actual trails that were just expanded didn't work so well. The fire breaks that were the creek, worked very well. But because Tassajara is so steep coming down, the fire just rolled down. And so with the breaks that were created were basically little gullies to dissuade as much as possible or capture things as they were rolling down before they continued to roll down. That was with mixed success, actually, because I think there was so much fire and so many rocks and so many things being loosened that things did actually end up coming down past the fire breaks because of it. So, but in other areas where along the creek where the area was flat, a fire break of this wide, which was just a natural trail, nothing we had done, stopped the fire. So it totally depends on the landscape, the conditions, the intensity of the wind, the intensity of the fire at that particular place. Fire has a very unique behavior. So, but we still did our best to prepare a fire break. And in the wilderness around us, it was harder to create as wide a fire break as we would have preferred.
There are various kinds and types of fire breaks, and each of them have tactical and strategic advantages. You had mentioned the fire break up off of Panoramic Highway. We also have a series of fire breaks along the ridge tops on Blythedale Ridge, Middle Ridge, and that area up there. Those are strategic fire breaks that we use when we're drawing the box that we're going to try to contain the fire in. Those breaks are used to be very large areas to keep a fire from one community to the next or one canyon to the next. And we reinforce those with the airplanes, with the bulldozers. Those are things that have to be in place ahead of time and have to be given a lot of thought towards where they need to go and how they need to be maintained so they are effective when the fire sometimes comes from the bottom up or from the top down. And the weather conditions and the location and the type of fire will have effect on that. The other really important fire break from my perspective is around everybody's home. And that's more of a tactical fire break versus a strategic fire break. And any amount of modification you can do to the immediate fuels around your structure will enhance its ability to survive a fire, whether or not there's somebody directly there to throw some dirt with a shovel, have a hose line, knock some fire embers down, or just influence that fire enough to where it might slow down or lose its intensity because you've created a defensible space or a break around your individual piece of property. So the preparedness piece is critically important on an ongoing basis, which is what you have done at Tassajara, and then for the firefighters thinking in that larger, more strategic, how do we keep the fire from Larkspur from getting into Mill Valley, or how do we keep it from the drainage coming out of your beach from getting into Mill Valley? And those large breaks have a big influence on that.
One other thing I'd like to mention also is that when you say fire break, that's the use during a fire. But Blythedale Ridge also has a recreational use. So we have a lot of assets in Mill Valley that are both for recreation as well as for our own safety, whether it's our steps, lanes, and paths, which is used for recreation and people going up and down the hills, but they're also our evacuation route in a fire. Whether it's our creek, which is normally when it's not raining, there's not a high tide, is a wonderful asset for our community, and then as you saw, there's some pictures of some floods there. So when you think about these things, I hate to say use the yin and the yang, but think about the fact that these assets have dual purposes, and that we use them at different times for different things, both for our recreation and for our safety.
So talking about disaster preparedness, I live in San Antonio. About a month ago, we had a situation where someone banged into a power pole, and it knocked out the electricity from the freeway all the way into Fairfax. Traffic was jacked up along Sir Francis Drake every which way. It took me an hour to go, 2 blocks. That got me thinking, what do we do in case of an emergency, a disaster? which way do we go? What do we do? And I'm not just thinking fire, I'm thinking flood, earthquake. So we started talking about this in the community, and everybody had different ideas, but nobody had any solid plan. So is there an evacuation route? I mean, some people said, go towards the ocean, go up Bolinas Ridge, go, forget Sir Francis Drake, go to Butterfield. You know, I mean, I feel like we would be like trapped like little squirrels over there by Hawthorne Hills. What do we do?
I'm glad that that event prompted you to start asking those questions, because when you don't think about it until it's happening, it's usually a little bit too late. And when people ask me a similar question like that, you know, if there's a fire, where do I go? Where do I evacuate? And I'll ask them questions like, well, is the fire coming from the top down? Is it coming from the bottom up? Is it a cool day and it's a fog-induced wind, or is it one of those red flag days where it's a hot, dry wind coming from inland and is creating an extreme fire condition? What if you can't leave? Is your house ready to shelter in place? Do you have a plan? All those kind of things. So there's no easy answer when it's happening, but the challenge is to break it down into small pieces and not choke on the elephant, but nibble away at it, and to get a community interested, and then reach out to your preparedness partners, whether it be a CERT team, a homeowner association, a business group, you know, centered around flooding in San Anselmo Creek. There's lots of reasons these groups can get together and parlay that energy and come up with some strategic expectations that you can partner with your local fire department, your emergency preparedness commission. But there is no one, if the fire is burning, you always do this. You have to be very situationally aware and have a plan, but know that that plan needs to have some flexibility in it. So if you normally drive this way, and that's where that power line's across the road, and you can't drive that way, that you know where that evacuation route is, or you can actually just hunker down in your house and ride out that event. And my experience has been that people tend to rely on public safety when the problem occurs to solve the problem. And your Mill Valley Fire Department has 8 firefighters on a day. We do a great job of dealing with the day-to-day emergencies, and it's that day where it's the red flag or the earth is shaken and everybody needs something at the same time that we are going to be challenged to meet all those needs. So it's critically important that you ask these questions in sort of that calm environment so that you can start to plan and think through some of that.
One other thing, I think there was a great quote, I think, from Vince Lombardi, and I could get this wrong, but it was something like, the more I practice, the luckier I get. Right? And so, it's just interesting to me because I saw Colleen and David speak up at a Wildfire Fire Conference in Portland earlier this week. And listening to Jeff and listening to David, I was hearing a lot of the same things, which is, and here's how you should think about, oh, I'm sorry.
Louder.
And here's how you should think about in the moment. You dealt with an emergency, you do emergencies. And so how you think about it, how you approach it, how you engage, is largely due to how you prepared. The more I prepare, the luckier I get. And so you can do that both on an individual level, on a neighborhood level, on a town level, on a county level, etc. And we have great examples here of how that happens every day. Am I right?
I've had the opportunity to get the majority of the fire experience that I've had in my career outside of Mill Valley, which if I have to get it, I would rather be outside of our community. I've actually fought fire with Jack Froggett, the firefighter that was shown in that image up in Weaverville in Northern California. And I can tell you that the further away you go from populated centers and the more rural, the more self-sufficient and the more aware people are because they live in the environment on a day-to-day basis. When you're into the urbanized settings, and I've been in downtown Chico, I've been in Ventura, I've been in Calaveras County, the closer you are to having a cocoon around some of those elements in your day-to-day life, the harder it is to think in the moment. So it's really challenging, but it's really important to be able to kind of think ahead. And I just want to reinforce that point of having enough time 3 weeks out to know what the fire was eventually going to do when it got there, even though there was a little bit of surprise at the veracity when it did arrive. But having some plans, having some equipment, having a little bit of training. I'm not encouraging you all to go out and buy fire pumps and fire jackets, but I'm encouraging you to take assessment of your property and of your circumstances and your plan. We have a program that we promote in California, and it's actually part of a national program called Ready, Set, Go. And the concept is be ready way ahead of time with knowing what you're going to do when you have to do it. That means your home is structurally constructed to resist fire, to be earthquake resistant, that you have the cache of supplies, the water, the food, batteries. Set means when it's time to take action that you do it early enough to where you can actually get out of the danger zone and not enhance the danger to firefighters or rescuers or to yourself. And then go when the call comes in. I have been in numerous large fire incidents where the firefight has to take a back seat because people have chosen not to evacuate, and then when it's too late, they need to be protected and saved. And in your case, you were in an area that you could defend yourself and be isolated and still have a good survivability profile based on all the experiences and training you had. Not everybody has the benefit of that, and a lot of times when those problems occur in an urbanized community, they're first world problems. They're not third world problems. They're not, I know how to dig, I know how to work a shovel, I know how to get down in the trench. The first world issues are, you're gonna come and protect and save me, right? And we may not be able to get down that road. We may not be able to cross where that power line came across the road. So we just really want to encourage everybody to do exactly what you're talking about and take action early and assess and develop a plan and partner with your community neighbors.
Steve.
So this is for David as well as for both of you, but so the whole thing you're talking about, Jeff, of being prepared, you know, that it's clear that the fire department, police department won't be there for everybody, but I'm not thinking just prepared like, and clearly as a community would be great, like, you know, and obviously how we do this, you know, emergency preparedness, communities be prepared, but I'm thinking more like, as an individual, what, and the question is, what is the power of being prepared, like knowing where your stuff is, knowing where, you know, and like this woman saying, I don't know where to go, and even though we make emergency plans, like with my daughter and my family, it's sort of a question like, where is...
You need to put the mic.
Okay, is this better?
Where
is the best place to meet? How do you choose what's the best place? But also, what's the value of being prepared, of having a family plan, having somebody to call, having going through the steps of everything it takes, of checking to make sure you have the food and you can shelter in place or evacuate. It's sort of, why is that so important? When it actually happens, what is the rewards of that, if you want? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I can speak to part of that, you know, and the first part of preparedness is know where your mind is. You know what's going on for you in this moment in your mind. You know, where's your attention? Are you fully taking in what's actually happening in this moment? Or are you blinded, if you will, or is the smoke of fear and anxiety totally clouding your judgment and your ability to assess what's actually happening in this moment? Is the building on fire? To what degree is the building on fire? Where are the escape routes? Where is the fire extinguisher? Where's my daughter? Where are my friends? You know, where's the phone? You know, so what is happening in this moment? Are you present enough to take it in, observe clearly, and respond to the actual reality of what's happening, and not your story or your emotional state? So that, if you will, is a fire-adapted mind. You know, and then there's the fire-adapted home. You know, what preparations have you done in advance? You know, fire extinguisher, a plan with your family about where to meet. You know, any other of those. You know, the fire professionals suggested ways to prepare your home to be adapted to fire, if you will, the situation of fire. And then there's the fire-adapted ecology. You know, fire is natural to the landscape. It's going to happen. The landscape depends on fire. It really, really does. The fish depend on fire. There's so many plants that depend on fire. So we welcome it, we need it. And the landscape is adapted to it. The ecology is one full cycle. So how are we as humans ready to just engage it? for what it is, as we engage with each other. We're all fire. Each one of us is a different fire burning at a different time. How are you going to meet each other? With what heart and mind are you going to meet each other? When can you take care of yourself, pull back, support yourself and your family how you need to, and when do you need to extend outwards and meet it? So now I'll turn it over to those who can speak more practically in terms of the actual physical preparation.
It was a great way of seeing being present is being there.
Exactly.
Yes.
And being present now is also what you need to prepare for the future. In Zen, there is no, ultimately there is no past and future. There's always this moment. In Zen, there's ultimately no past and future. You're always preparing, you're always in this moment. And it's always related. There's always a past in this moment, and there's always a future in this moment that you're taking care of. So.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to this, but you said something interesting, right? Family plan. You didn't say plan for the unknown person on a different continent in a different time zone that I've never met before. What you said was family plan. Now, why is that important? Because those are the things that matter to you. You make a plan. So you took some action in advance of an event, and it was for your family. Probably the most essential people in your life. I mean, to me, that's the essence of it, which is I'm going to build a plan so I know what to do in the event of an emergency of any sort. And so it doesn't have to be an elaborate plan. It could be a simple plan as, if anything happens, call Uncle Steve at this number. Guess what that is? That's a plan. Very simple plan, it's one that I remember. To a very complicated plan, which is, okay, we're going to meet at the corner of Throckmorton and East Blightdale at 12:44, 5.5 years from now. That's a different kind of plan. But the point is, we're looking for a way to get ourselves organized around the things that matter most for us. What matters, think about it, what matters most to you? You, your family, your home, your community. Those are the things you should be thinking about, how you interact with. So I love when we were talking about the interdependent nature of all this, right? Those are the things that matter most to us. So I just think about in your own life, what are the things that matter most to you and what's your plan for them?
Steve, one of the things I think I heard you say was sort of the value of doing all this, and so I'm hoping a few hands go up. Who's taken the CERT training? Awesome. Does any of you remember the pyramid when we were in the urban search and rescue and the light search and rescue? About at the bottom of the pyramid is the majority of the people that people with a very small amount of training can help. And as the problem gets more complicated, it requires more specialized training and experience. Having just the ability to grab a pry bar and lift the bookcase off of yourself or your neighbor is a huge fixing the problem so you aren't a part of a larger problem, which then requires a more engaged or robust response. So the value is, if you can do one little thing to make your situation a little bit better, you're going to make it better theoretically for your family, your neighbor, the neighborhood, for the firefighters that have to respond, and actually then focus on the larger, more problematic issues that require more technique, more expertise, more training. So the value of training is that you might do one little thing that's going to have a huge effect on your ability to hopefully, not have to call it a disaster, but just a moment in time that you overcame.
Since we're in the library and Colleen is an author, I wanted to ask a slightly different kind of question about the story. But before I do, I'm just curious, how many people have read Colleen's book? You really should. You are only getting a tiny glimpse of what an amazing story it is. And I won't do the marketing for her, she's very good at that. But if you want to know about the history of firefighting and disasters, and about Zen, and about how people react under stress, and a great story. Okay, that's enough.
I do know him, but I did not plant him. Swear.
So, moving on to the question. The question is, I'm really curious, having read the book, what happened afterwards in terms of, I didn't really get a sense of what usually happens is people come out of the woodwork and say, you really shouldn't have stayed. You're lucky you lived. And that doesn't, in my recollection, show up too much, or maybe at all in the book. And is that because it didn't happen at all, or were there naysayers, maybe fire officials or others who were pissed off about the decision that was reached?
I'll answer and then I'll give it to David. I mean, I heard that. In general, when I would ask the folks who stayed for the fire at Tassajara, were they lucky? They wouldn't really go there. They were lucky in the way that you mentioned, you know, through practice. David would say something like, you know, circumstances were in our favor. But they also worked really hard. And when I would ask the firefighters, there would be a lot more reservation, you know, about a lot more emphasis on luck and a lot more reservation about how badly it could have gone. And I just think that's by virtue of the fact that the firefighters, you know, have seen how badly it can go, probably, in their own lives, and they've heard about it. And some of the commanders making decisions on the fire had seen how badly it can go, and their decisions probably came from that place. But these guys didn't have that, whether you want to call it a hindrance or a benefit, you know, they didn't have that kind of prior knowledge of the fire to bias them.
I think Colleen wrote this in the book. I'm not even sure what luck is. You know, if something favorable happens, we call it lucky. If something unfavorable happens, we call it unlucky. And my experience was just causes and conditions, which is a standard phrase in Zen, came together such as this happened, such as the 5 of us actually lived. None of us were hurt. You know, part of it you could say was beforehand the causes and conditions such as we prepared. We prepared in a number of ways, physically, emotionally, mentally, for what happened. Preparedness you know, as we say in terms of enlightenment, you practice to become accident prone for enlightenment. You never know when it's going to strike you, you know. So are you lucky you suddenly wake up to the nature of your reality or not? I don't know, but you know, you still do the work of this moment-to-moment living your life. And sometimes things you may describe as good happen, and other times things that you describe as unlucky happen. But it's all just life happening. So you know, this time around, it was a favorable outcome. You know, so great. Next time, I don't know what's going to happen. You know, it may not be the same circumstances. Something not as fortunate may happen. We deal with it then. Whatever arises in that moment, we deal with it then.
There's an emerging trend as these fires become mega fires, and not just large fires, but mega fires, hundreds of thousands of acres being consumed, that the reality that we're coming to as fire professionals is sometimes the best thing we can do is get people out of the way and let the fire do what it's going to do until we get to a strategic advantage such as a weather shift. When people are unable or unwilling to evacuate, it shifts our focus immediately. And first and foremost for the fire department is always life safety, then property conservation, then trying to maintain an ecological balance by keeping the fire from doing too much additional damage. But we always want to ask people ahead of time to get out if there's that opportunity to get them out. And when they don't, it just changes that whole dynamic and the plan has to shift. In 1995, I was in a fire up in Lake County, and we had about 45 firefighters deployed in a residential neighborhood in a very remote area, a lot of outbuildings and cabins, and about 25 residents who ultimately refused to leave, and we could not talk them into leaving. So we said, okay, well, there's an escape route to the north, there's an escape route to the south. If we have to go, we're going to take them with us. Well, both escape routes were cut off by fire, and the fire made a 40,000 acre run over the top of us in about a 6-hour period. And the best way I could describe it is a snow globe being shaken for 6 hours, but it wasn't snowflakes that was falling, it was fire. We lost multiple homes that night because we had to put all our efforts into protecting the people who now couldn't get out. So we have to make those adjustments and shifts, and that's what we do. But it's always our preference to ask people to take advantage of the opportunity when they can, because you don't know how fast things are going to change. And you guys were, you know, very lucky. You were in a position where you had the opportunity of experience and training and knowledge and the pre-planning that made it a very positive outcome. But as you indicated, things can come out differently, and sometimes those change at a moment's notice.
You were evacuating, so I'm really curious, was there a pivotal moment, an observation, a conversation or communication between the five of you that made you turn back?
The decision to turn back actually was a seed in all of us that was already laid quite some time. And it was laid because we had done all this preparation. The five of us there had been there for most of the time, except for Steve, in the weeks leading up to the fire, talking to the fire professionals, having the background in the training, had been part of the preparation. We had it in our bodies, if you will, a knowledge and that came, a confidence that came from the knowledge and the preparation that we had done. And the fact that so many fire professionals told us, hey, I'd stay here. You know, I'd stay here with a beer, you know, and this is the safest place I want to be. You know, those on the ground were actually supportive of us staying. They wanted to be with us. The fire command, who had never visited Tassajara, who had a larger imperative that they were trying to take care of, were the ones making decisions about, we don't want our folks there because of the road, you know. So the seed of, we trust that we've done the work. And I only stayed because I felt we've done the work. And, you know, and even if we have to go to the shelter of the stone office, which was, it's a stone building with, you know, a sprinkler system on it, and having our reactive, you know, our wrap protective around us, we knew that that could be a condition. We knew we might have to jump into the creek as a last resort. Because we had done that work, we felt prepared and confident. The decision on the road was spontaneous. Actually, Steve and I had, in the car, had a conversation. He asked me, how do I feel? And I said, this is wrong. We shouldn't be leaving, you know. And so both of us had already started plotting about how are we going to return. And then Marco and Graham also had already in their minds saying, how are we going to turn around here? You know. So those seeds were already there. The situation where we met Frogger on the road at the no turnaround point was that, you know, the condition was just right at that moment. And he actually says he regretted actually saying what he said to us on the road, because that actually gave us the opening to make the decision to turn around. You know, so the reality was, since the conditions came together, it allowed in that moment the seed of maybe we can turn around to be watered. And so the five of us decided to do that. And others wanted to join us, but because they hadn't been prepared and so much in the decision-making process, we thought it was better maybe not to have them join us at that point and not to extend the risk.
I just want to add that Stuart, part of this was Stuart, who was the CAL FIRE captain that was on the ground with them, who's really, you know, a friend of Tassajara. They could see his distress, and he was standing more in your shoes, you know. He was really worried. These are people. I'm going to be responsible even if I'm not on duty here. And he couldn't bear that thought, and they could see that. And so this journey up the road was in a way, the way of honoring Stuart's expertise, that what they needed to do was get out. And then the five of them on their own said, we are taking responsibility for ourselves. This is our decision, we're going back. So I think it was a beautifully, very skillful, you know, in the moment way of taking care of Stuart as well, the firefighter. So somebody up back there is jumping up with the microphone.
Jay, could you speak to some of the resources that are available for people to prepare?
There are many things that can be done at the individual level and at the community level. I'll start sort of at that ground level and we'll work our way up. There's a very robust and aggressive program in our community to support emergency preparedness at the individual level and all the way up to the community level and at the countywide level. Take a CERT class, take a Get Ready class, take the Fire in Mill Valley class, meet with your neighbors and organize a homeowner association, maybe around the pothole or around the street light, but it's a call to getting together and use that as an opportunity to develop those local street level preparedness initiatives. There are a wealth of resources available to you on our city website through our Emergency Preparedness Commission, checklists, go kits. I'm going to let Ron speak to that piece, and then I'll talk a little further about some of our community efforts.
Yes, right. So a few things. We encourage you to take a look at Colleen's book. We're selling it over here, which would be great. And then secondly, also to, we have some sign-up sheets here for a range of programs that Jeff described. They're available on the city's website, but it's your cities, it's your tax dollars at work, so take advantage of it, because it helps you to develop that plan for the things that matter most to you. What strikes me about this story, I really like about this story, is that there's a community, right? Look around, this is your community. You heard about Colleen and David's community. You knew each other. They lived in a place that had deep meaning to you, that was worth defending. And you had woven in all of those things that you needed to do to be prepared because it mattered deeply to you, right? And so when I think about your community, it matters deeply to you. You live here, you grew up here, your kids go to school here, you work here, you're active in the community. But make this kind of thing part of your life, as the residents of Tassajara made it part of their life. That's what I think is the real big takeaway here, which is we all have an affinity for Mill Valley. It has deep meaning to us. So follow the example and do all the things that you can do to be prepared in the same way that the Tassajara community was. I think that's the real lesson here, right? And that it's in that moment. You don't pick them. You don't pick the moment. The moment picks you. And so to be ready for that moment is important not only for you and your community, but everybody is interdependent. We're all relying on each other. I'm counting on the fact that there are other people in my neighborhood that might need to pull me out of something one day, or that there's people who do CPR on the street in case I go down, and people should be counting on me for the fact that if something happens to them, that I know first aid, or I can help them out in an emergency. Because what you might think is a small emergency to you in the grand scheme is a big emergency to someone else. And so think about your community and weaving in those preparedness things to your community, because that's what matters to you most. So we have a whole range of resources to help you do that we're happy to share with you, and we have sign-up sheets over here for a range of these.
One of the things we discovered in the fire at Tassajara was we needed to have a more intimate relationship with the Forest Service and the fire service around us, and actually with our neighbors as well. And so having those relationships in advance, and those relationships were very, very important during the fire in many different ways. So that's the one thing that we really felt afterwards. We need to cultivate relationship. We need to know each other. We need to know each other's capacities and how we can rely on each other, and to what imperatives do each of us have. What's important to each of us, and how can we support each other? But you don't know that until we have dialogue. So that's part of what we're trying to do at Tassajara, is have constant dialogue with the wider community around us in order to cultivate that particular tool and flexibility and capacity of our Sangha community, but also the rest of the population that takes care of the wilderness around us.
I wanted to add just a little bit more to Catherine's question about kind of what we do and what have we been doing. At the larger level, at the community level, Ron and I were at the city council meeting a few meetings back, giving a presentation to the city council on the occasion of the 20-year anniversary of the Fire Safety Task Force report, which came out of the experience of what happened over in Oakland. And some initiatives were identified, some challenges were laid down by the city council 20 years ago. And here we are 20 years later, and we have, thanks to the support that all of you have given, a municipal service tax that puts money towards vegetation management and fuel reduction programs. We have a Measure L fire flow program that over the last 20 years has added hundreds of thousands of feet of pipe to the water structures throughout Marin County. And our own kind of Dharma rain, if you will, yeah. And so all of you are contributing collectively to making it better for all of us as a community. And And I think Ron said this a couple times because he sits on the general plan review group that's working on the city right now. And disaster preparedness doesn't have to be an afterthought. It can be woven into our daily thought process. And that in and of itself allows us to be much more unaffected when these things occur because they become minor events versus big, significant, knock you off your game and really take you offline for a while events.
Oh, yes, right here.
Well, so my son got married 5 years ago when the fires were in San Diego, and his in-laws moved to Back Rancho Bernardo because the wedding parents were there. So through the whole wedding, we were like driving through, all the fire coming down, all the firefighters at the wedding, but that's just a side story. My real question is, none of you have spoken about air quality. What do you do during the fire? I have my ready, set, go in my trunk, but the real issue, and I have a huge bay tree next to my house. It would cost $10,000 to cut down, but I have the ready, set, go pack in my car. What do you do with the air quality when the oxygen is being sucked out of the air and you have all that ash coming in?
Well, if you can get out ahead of time, that would be the first option that I would suggest. If you can't, you need to be able to ride it out, and part of being able to ride it out is inside a home that's ignition resistant and has windows that are double pane and are going to seal up so you can actually stay inside and have some fresh air until that fire front is passed and the air quality is to a point or until you can then evacuate and get out.
David, you lived through this, right in the thick of it, in the heat of the moment. What was it like?
We, for many weeks, had bandanas that we just carried around with us and just put it on during the worst part of the days.
He said bandanas, not bananas.
Or bananas. Bandanas. It's my East Coast accent, it's just coming out. And so that made a difference for those people who needed to. Also, staying indoors as much as possible when we weren't working, in order and keeping the windows shut and so on. That was kind of, the reality is we couldn't escape it too much because we had to be out and prepared, but having something to protect our lungs just a little bit more and taking breaks. And we were exhausted for weeks after because of the air quality depleted the oxygen in our body. So that's a reality. Those people with asthma and health problems, we asked them to leave, basically saying this is, we don't want you to harm yourself, so please do what you need to do to take care of yourself during that time. So.
This is a question for David. Colleen, your book is Zen Mind Meets Wildfire. And, I don't want to talk about preparation, I want to talk about the experience. Because when I've seen...
I want to talk about your experience, not preparing for it, but when it happened. When the fire arrived, Zen Mind met Wildfire. I haven't read the book, so I'm assuming there's some interesting anecdotes in there. But I really would like to know, David, from your perspective, how did it feel? What did it sound like? What did it look like? How did you steel yourself to stay calm? Because at the end of the day, we can try to prepare and do our best, but if we ever find ourselves not prepared, how do we stay calm? And I'm not a Zen master, so I can't, I don't have years of practice, and I'd like to get your experience and your thoughts on that.
You have many questions in that question.
I've been waiting for a while, so
So I'm just going to talk and see what actually gets responded to, if you will. Part of it is staying present. For me, it was noticing what's going on in my body. Putting attention in my feet, staying grounded. Where am I walking? Where am I going to? Keeping my eyes open. All my senses, all 6 senses. The consciousness is considered a sense. So just reading through what's going on. Looking at, in terms of emotional space, what's going on for me, There's only really one moment that I could say, I really experienced fear. And that was the moment of seeing the fire rolling down from all sides into the valley. literally converging on us all at once. You know, I call it my oh shit moment. You know, it's like, what did we get ourselves into? You know, but the body then said, okay, this is what's happening. So another wisdom over time, you know, when you practice for a while, takes over. The mind no longer takes over, but some quality of wisdom that's already inside, that's been trained for time, says, okay, take care of what you need to take care of now. You know, and the first thing was we got to turn on the pumps to make sure dry rain is going. You know, and then we're going to start, once we have that going on, where's the fire? Where's it coming down? You know, we're going to start a backfire. At one point we started a backfire, or tried to start a backfire to protect the nearest buildings. And that was taken care of. We moved on to the next thing. Where else is fire coming in? And turned to that. Met that completely. When that kind of was taken care of, then we turned to the next thing. So it was a constant turning to the next immediate thing that was most apparent. You know, in terms of the fire coming down, it was a lot of smoke. Definitely a lot of smoke. Sometimes you couldn't see the fire because of the smoke. Other times you could see just a little, 50-foot wall of flame coming down the mountain. Very loud, lots of wind at one point. It was kind of an eerie wind before the fire actually arrived, coming at different directions. It was a sense of not knowing what to expect, because I've never been in a fire, so I didn't know what to expect. So there was this mind of curiosity. How's this going to happen? What's going to happen now? And that actually helped. Rather than relying on the idea of what the fire was going to be, I actually, and the rest of us were actually able to see the fire that actually appeared, rather than our idea of what was going to happen. So that idea of don't have a concept of the fire in advance that you are so attached to that you can't actually see what's coming forward. Where is the fire burning? How strongly is it burning? Sometimes it was just very low. Other times the whole building was on fire. We had to actually meet it and determine how close can we get to it. What do we need to do in order to put it out? Do we use a shovel? So this particular fire appeared this way. There were certain wind conditions, smoke conditions. It sounded like an engine coming down, a train coming down the mountain at times. And it varied throughout the 6.5 hours that it was with us. As it was passing through. They'd speak about a head of a fire. The strongest part of the fire passing through first. Usually that causes the least, I could be wrong about this. I understand that sometimes this causes the least amount of danger. What happens afterwards is these spot fires. The fires that come out after the head had passed through, where something kind of, smolders for a bit, and then starts a flame. And that's what happened at Tassajara. Everything that burned later. In fact, a day later, one of the buildings we lost started on fire because the fire had smoldered overnight along routes underground, and only later did it actually burst. And we had just come back for lunch. We were just kind of walking around going, okay, everything's fine. Suddenly, the fire started again. Another day later, another fire further away started. 11 days later, the birdhouse, one of the student cabins that burned the first day, came back to life and fire. The ruins started to burn again. 11 days later, So we never knew what to expect. And it was this wonderful teaching again. Don't assume. Don't assume what's going to appear in the next moments. Stay with it, And anyhow, I could describe that particular fire. There's many different types of fires, many different ways it appears, so it's just one experience.
Just want to check, Anji, how are we doing on time? Do we have it's 8:30? 8:30?
Take a couple more questions for you to come up to you afterwards.
In the hat. Do you want to come up here and use this microphone? I don't know where the other one is.
I was particularly curious, David, how only 5 of you defended the entire compound, and what was the communications you used and the interactions that went on?
Well, the major thing that helped us was the fact that we had done all the preparation in advance. Had we not had Dharma rain, had Dharma rain not been going for 3 weeks, creating a humidity level, that actually when the fire came down, it came really fast, and then about 75 feet from the valley floor, it slowed. Because it hit, basically, the protection, if you will, of Dharma rain humidity, and also the Riparian corridor, the creek there. So that gave us a benefit, you know. So again, I want to say we were only able to do what we did because we were prepared. Otherwise, we would have been screwed, you know. And then in terms of other preparation, we had walkie-talkies. So we were in contact with each other via the walkie-talkies. And whenever one of us, and sometimes we're by ourselves for like an hour at a time, you know, at one part of the valley trying to take care of a particular thing. But if it got too much, we called for help. And then the other people would come and help out. So in the book, that happens a number of times. You'll see descriptions where that happened. We had the walkie-talkies. That was very fortunate, you know. And I was also, as a communications person, calling out, checking the phone in the Stone office to see, are we getting water? Is any help coming? And letting the people outside, it's Zen Center in Jamesburg, knowing how we were doing. We're okay, folks. We're okay at this point. A couple hours later, we're still fine, you know. And so that constant communication was very important. There's this other quality that I can't, you know, I don't know how far to go with this. The unspoken knowing. You know, when you're in a community together, and you live and work together, and practice together closely. For example, when you're in the meditation hall, you can hear someone walking outside on the gravel, and I can often say who that is, by their footfall. You know, and there's this other quality of connectedness. You know it, you guys all know it, you know, with your family members and so on, you know, where you have a sense of where is someone, how are they, does something need to happen here? So we relied on each other as much as possible for that quality of just checking in with each other, letting each other know how we were doing, but also this other intuition that, you know, we just kind of had to be in tune to. I understand firefighters have the same, you know, capacity when they work as a unit very closely together, you know, so. Next question. Yes.
I was on the other end of your concern at the time. I was in Sacramento overseeing the state fire. And, excuse me? No, yeah. Okay, well, in any event, the problem was when the importance of your skill for political connection.
Hold the microphone a little closer because it's.
The admiration I had for you, because of your political skill in communication, you were ready, including the governor's office. I was overseeing the building for that, and I found I had a telephone all the time with somebody on your fire. Anyway, and my point is more important that in overseeing fires, and occasionally, in order for the federal firefighters and state firefighters, I'd have to sign in a fire. So I'd often have to fly out and see a fire, and I will never forget something that haunts me up in the valley. And that was the Riverside fires. They took me out, and there were a blowtorch coming down the valley, and 200 homes burning, and more burning. And I'd come back and look at New Valley, and that same condition exists on our mountain, where you get a wind-driven fire. It happened in open. Houses become fuel under that heat. And all the preparation really, you know, I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night just thinking that blowtorch goes over tonight. Thinking, gee whiz, how can we ever deal with a fire like that? That's your job. But it's a military condition I was fascinated to find. They have command all the way up, state, federal, local. And it's all important to understand that because sometimes those orders come down. That's one way you can handle something like that is have authority and command and who calls the tankers in and who calls the federal firefighters in and so on. But it's a dimension that really needs to be studied beyond the scope of what we can put out in the room.
You wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that. I rarely go to sleep. Because I think about it all the time. And when I'm not thinking about it in the summer, I'm thinking about the flood potential in the winter and the runoff and all the associated issues that we face. And I know that our City Council and our Preparedness Commission, we all spend a lot of time thinking about this. And if you think about it in that totality, it can be an elephant that's hard to chew on and you can feel like you're going to choke on it, but if we take just a little bit at a time, and each of our homes are a little bit more ignition resistant, and rather than putting the bamboo up so I don't have to see my neighbor, but I plant something that's a little less fire supportive, and maybe get to know my neighbor a little bit, and they're maybe going to be the one who helps me in an emergency, or I help them. So just rethinking some of that, hopefully again diminishes that impact. But I will tell you that our most recent significant fire history in Mill Valley is in 1929. 100 homes burnt and about 12 to 1,300 acres, depending on which map you look at. In that footprint today, there are 850 homes. And that's a reality that we have to face every day. And through the initiatives sponsored by the City Council with our budgeting for and our education through the Preparedness Committee and the military-like response that we coordinate, I can get on the phone right now and order 500 engines to Mill Valley and they'll be on the road in 5 minutes. We have that kind of system available. But all that's after the fact. And when you're pressing that button, it's kind of the beginning of a failure, a system of failures already. The goal is to think about that stuff ahead of time.
I just want to thank everyone so much. Jeff, Ron, David, and Colleen. It's been a fantastic program. For those of you who want to buy Colleen's book, we do have it on sale here. And if you're interested in signing up for the classes that they've talked about, we have a list that you can put your name on. We encourage you to do so. And everyone will probably hang around if you have additional questions. Thank you so much.